On a seemingly ordinary morning, Captain Richard Sullivan took the controls of an Airbus A380, with 492 passengers on board, heading for a routine transoceanic flight. But at 39,000 feet over the Atlantic, all 4 engines failed simultaneously, transforming the aircraft into a giant glider. With only 8 minutes before losing critical altitude, he had to make decisions that would separate life from death for nearly 500 people, while facing the deafening silence of a powerless cockpit. There are moments in aviation where everything you've learned, every simulator hour, every memorized procedure converges into a few minutes that define not just your career, but hundreds of lives. That March morning started like any other, but it would end up teaching me that pilots don't control the sky. We only navigate through the possibilities it offers us. My name is Richard Sullivan, and that day I had 23 years of commercial flying experience. I had accumulated over 15,000 flight hours, most of them without incidents worth mentioning. That comfortable routine, that feeling of absolute control that comes with experience, was about to be shattered in a way I never imagined possible. When I took the controls that morning, alongside my co-pilot Andrew Matthews, a competent professional with 8 years of experience, I had no idea we would face a situation that manuals describe as statistically improbable to the point of being nearly impossible. The Airbus A380 we were commanding was a marvel of modern engineering, a giant of the skies with capacity to transport over 500 passengers. That specific day, we had 492 souls on board, families traveling on vacation, executives on business trips, elderly people visiting distant relatives, children seeing the ocean for the first time through the windows. Each of them implicitly trusted that Andrew and I would get them safely to their destination. The flight was proceeding perfectly. We had taken off at 6:37 in the morning, under clear skies and with ideal weather conditions. The flight plan would take us across the Atlantic on a well-established route, cruising at an altitude of 39,000 feet. The cabin crew had just served breakfast, and I could imagine the aroma of fresh coffee and warm pastries spreading through the cabin. The sun was beginning to illuminate the horizon ahead of us, painting the ocean in golden and orange tones. It was the kind of morning that reminded me why I fell in love with aviation, that feeling of freedom, of being suspended between earth and stars, commanding a magnificent machine through the infinite sky. We were 2 hours and 15 minutes into the flight when everything changed. At 8:52, I was reviewing some navigation data when Andrew casually commented, "Engine 4 parameters oscillating slightly." I looked at the instruments. He was right. There were small fluctuations in temperature and pressure, nothing alarming yet, but definitely abnormal. "I'll monitor it," I responded, maintaining the professional calm that's second nature to someone who's been flying this long. I increased my attention on that specific engine, but also maintained an overview of all systems. In aviation, isolated problems rarely remain isolated for long. 15 seconds later, the alarm sounded. Engine 4 was failing. It wasn't an oscillation anymore, it was a complete failure. "Initiating Engine 4 shutdown procedure," I announced, my hands already moving through the controls with the precision that comes from endless repetition in simulators. Andrew confirmed each action, working in perfect sync with me. One engine failing on an A380 isn't a serious emergency. The aircraft was designed to fly with 3, even with 2 engines if necessary. But as I completed the shutdown procedure, something completely improbable happened. The alarm sounded again, Engine 1 failing. My heart raced, but my voice remained steady. Engine 1 also failing. Andrew, confirm the parameters. He was already checking, his fingers flying over the controls while his eyes rapidly scanned the displays. Confirmed. Total loss on Engine 1. "Richard, this shouldn't—" He didn't finish the sentence because the impossible happened. In rapid succession, like dominoes falling, engines 2 and 3 failed. 4 alarms sounding simultaneously, red lights flashing across the entire panel. And then, silence. The most terrifying silence a pilot can experience. The silence of an aircraft without power, instantly transformed from a supersonic jet into a giant 5- and 60-ton glider. "Complete failure of all 4 engines," Andrew said. And for the first time in all the years we'd flown together, I heard a tremor in his voice. I looked at the altimeter, 39,000 feet. I looked at the airspeed indicator, starting to decelerate. I looked at the navigation map. Ocean in all directions, the nearest land over 500 miles away. I did the calculations mentally, something all pilots learn but hope never to actually use. With our current altitude and mass, we had approximately 8 minutes of gliding flight before we lost enough altitude to enter a critical situation. 8 minutes to figure out what had happened, try to restart the engines, and if we couldn't, prepare 492 people for a water landing. If you found this story intriguing, subscribe to the Black Box channel. We have dozens of real accounts from pilots who faced the impossible in the skies. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," I transmitted on the radio, keeping my voice as calm and clear as possible. This is the international destination flight, experiencing complete failure of all 4 engines at altitude of 39,000 feet over the Atlantic. Initiating emergency procedures. The response from control came immediately, and I could detect the surprise and concern in the controller's voice. Received. Confirm. All 4 engines failed. Affirmative. Total failure. We are gliding. While maintaining communication, my mind was processing information at breakneck speed. Simultaneous failure of all 4 engines on an A380 was something I'd only seen in extreme training scenarios. Severe fuel contamination, massive volcanic ash ingestion, or catastrophic system failures. But there were no active volcanoes on our route. The tanks had been fueled at a top-tier airport with rigorous quality controls. What could have caused this? "Andrew, check the fuel system." "Pressure, flow, quality, everything," I ordered while beginning the engine restart attempt procedures. My fingers worked automatically through the controls, but my mind was divided among multiple simultaneous tasks. Maintain the aircraft in controlled gliding flight, communicate with air traffic control, try to diagnose the problem, constantly calculate our altitude and gliding distance, and plan the next actions. Training takes over in these moments. Years of simulators, thousands of hours practicing emergency procedures, everything converges into almost instinctive actions. But even with all the training, I could feel my heart pounding against my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Fuel system apparently normal," Andrew reported, the disbelief clear in his voice. "Adequate pressure in all tanks. No leaks detected. Quality within parameters." This made the situation even more disturbing. If it wasn't the fuel, what was it? I initiated the first restart attempt on engine 1. I followed every step of the procedure with surgical precision. Ignition, nothing. The engine remained dead. I tried engine 2, same result. The seconds passed like sand slipping through fingers. We had already lost 2 minutes since the initial failure. Our altitude was now 36,800 feet. We continued descending at a controlled angle, but every meter lost was 1 meter less between us and the ocean. "Richard, detecting abnormal pattern in external air temperature readings before the failures," Andrew said, his voice regaining professional firmness as he investigated the data. "There's a record of abrupt temperature drop, followed by suspended particles detected by the sensors." My hands momentarily paused over the controls. Suspended particles. Temperature drop. A terrible possibility began forming in my mind. "Volcanic ash?" I asked, though it seemed impossible. There was no volcanic activity reported on our route. "Possible," Andrew responded, already working to get more information. "But there were no alerts. Doesn't matter what caused it now," I continued, focusing on the immediate. "We need to restart these engines. I'm going to try reinitialization at lower altitude. The ash, if that's what it is, might be less dense lower down." It was a calculated risk. In theory, descending could take us to cleaner air. But every meter we descended was a meter. We might not be able to recover if the engines didn't restart. At 33,000 feet, I tried again. Engine 3 first this time. Ignition, compressor rotation, fuel system engaged. A cough. The engine gave a cough. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the first sign of life since everything had stopped. "Andrew, did you see that?" I asked, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. "Yes, try again," I repeated the procedure. Another cough, and then the engine caught. Not at full power, but it was running. The feeling of relief was so intense it almost made me shake. Engine 3 restarted, generating partial power. But we had no time to celebrate. We needed the other 3 engines too. A single engine wouldn't be enough to keep 492 people in the air for long. I tried engine 4. Nothing. Engine 2. nothing. Engine 1, nothing. At 29,000 feet, with 5 minutes passed since the emergency began, I had only one engine generating partial power and 3 completely dead. I made a decision. I'm going to focus on engines 2 and 4. If I can get 2 more running, we have a real chance. I worked methodically, repeating the restart procedures, adjusting parameters, trying different sequences. Sweat ran down my forehead, despite the cockpit air conditioning. Behind us, separated only by a door, 492 people continued their lives, most of them probably with no idea of the battle we were fighting for them. The cabin crew had been alerted to the situation and was discreetly preparing passengers for a possible emergency, but doing so in a way that wouldn't cause panic. At 25,000 feet, Engine 2 restarted, not with the hesitant cough of Engine 3, but with a healthy, strong roar. Full power available. "Engine 2 online," I shouted, and this time I couldn't hide the emotion in my voice. 2 engines. We had 2 engines running. It was enough. Technically, it was enough to keep the aircraft in the air and even climb again. But I wasn't going to stop there, not while we had a chance to recover more power. At 22,000 feet, with almost 7 minutes since the crisis began, I continued working on engines 1 and 4. The procedure had become almost automatic, my fingers knowing exactly where to go, what buttons to press, what sequences to follow. It was like a dance rehearsed thousands of times, but executed for the first time with real consequences. "Richard, information from control," Andrew said, his voice interrupting my concentration. "They confirmed previously unreported volcanic activity on a remote island on our route. Eruption began approximately 3 hours ago. The ash column reached our cruise altitude, but wasn't immediately detected by monitoring systems because of the isolated location. So that was it. We had flown through a volcanic ash cloud that nobody knew was there. The microscopic particles had entered the engines, melted with the extreme heat, and then solidified again, blocking critical components and suffocating the engines. It was the nightmare every pilot knows but hopes never to encounter. Engine 4 suddenly showed signs of life at 20,000 feet. But it was unstable, with erratic readings. I made an executive decision. I wasn't going to force it. 2 healthy engines were better than 3 engines with 1 potentially damaged that could cause additional problems. Maintaining engines 3 and 2 operational, giving up on additional restart of 4 and 1, I announced, stabilizing the aircraft at 18,000 feet. Initiating procedures for emergency landing at nearest alternate airport. Control had already identified our options. There was a suitable airport approximately 250 miles away. With 2 engines, we could make it, though it would be a tense and careful flight. "Cabin crew, this is the captain," I spoke on the intercom, now finally able to inform passengers of the situation. I chose my words carefully. "Ladies and gentlemen, we experienced a technical problem with our engines due to unforeseen atmospheric conditions. The situation is under control, and we are diverting to the nearest airport, where we will land in approximately 40 minutes. The cabin crew will instruct you on precautionary procedures. I ask that you remain calm and follow all crew instructions." I could imagine the reaction in the cabin, the initial fear, the whispered questions, the clasped hands, the worried looks. But I also knew that most people trust pilots, trust the training, trust the technology. And this time that trust wouldn't be betrayed. As we navigated toward the diversion, Andrew and I worked through an extensive checklist. We verified all systems, calculated the landing weight, coordinated with air traffic control, informed the company about the situation, and prepared the aircraft for a landing with only 2 operational engines. It was meticulous and methodical work, but each completed action was 1 step closer to safety. Engines 2 and 3 continued operating stably throughout the diversion flight. I monitored every parameter obsessively, ready to react to the slightest sign of trouble. But they performed magnificently, those engineering marvels doing exactly what they were designed to do: keep a 560-ton A380 in the air against all odds. The final approach was textbook perfect, as we say in aviation jargon. We configured the aircraft for landing, received priority clearance for the runway, and with emergency services positioned as a precaution, we initiated final descent. "Landing gear down and locked. 3 greens," Andrew reported. "Flaps in landing position. Speed stable." aligned with runway. I could see the runway ahead, that grey rectangle representing safety, representing solid ground, representing the end of this ordeal. My eyes moved constantly between the windshield and the instruments, making micro-adjustments to the yoke, maintaining precise speed, the perfect descent angle. 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. The runway approached rapidly. 20 feet. I reduced power slightly. 10 feet. I raised the nose of the aircraft subtly, and then with a slight impact that was barely felt by passengers, the main wheels touched the runway. I activated the reversers on engines 2 and 3, and the brakes began working, decelerating that giant machine. The nose of the aircraft lowered gently, the front wheels touching the runway. We continued decelerating, speed steadily decreasing. 100 knots, 80 knots, 60 knots, 40 knots. And finally, we stopped. In the middle of the runway, under the bright midday sun, with emergency services surrounding the aircraft as a precaution, we stopped. Engines shut down, parking brake set, aircraft secure, I announced, and only then did I allow my voice to tremble slightly. Andrew looked at me, and I saw my own relief reflected in his eyes. We had done it. Against absurd odds, we had brought 492 people safely back to the ground. I'm going to share something I learned in those 8 minutes suspended between sky and ocean, something that no manual, no training, no simulator hour can really teach until you're there, living that moment. Aviation isn't about controlling the impossible, it's about dancing with it. It's about understanding that flying is fundamentally an agreement between human beings and the forces of nature, and sometimes nature reminds you who's really in charge. In the days that followed, the investigation confirmed what we already suspected. An unreported volcanic eruption had created an ash cloud that wasn't detected by monitoring systems due to its extremely remote location and temporary failure of monitoring satellites in the region. We had flown through it without any warning, and the microscopic particles had done exactly what volcanic ash does to jet engines, transforming into molten glass that suffocates and damages internal components. Detailed engineering of engines 1 and 4 revealed extensive damage. Engine 3 had moderate but operable damage. Only Engine 2 had, by some luck or quirk of position and airflow, escaped relatively unscathed. If I hadn't made the decision to descend quickly and attempt restarts at lower altitude, where ash concentration was lower, perhaps none of the engines would have restarted. If I had panicked, if Andrew hadn't worked in perfect sync with me, if any of a dozen factors had been different, those 492 passengers could have faced a water landing, a terrifying proposition even with the best preparation. But they didn't. And that's the point I always try to convey when I tell this story. In the months that followed, I was contacted by many of the passengers from that flight. Some wanted to thank me personally, others wanted to understand what had happened. One woman told me she was traveling with her 3 children, and during those tense moments she had looked at their faces and made peace with what might happen. When we landed safely, she said, it was like being given a second chance at life. An elderly man told me he had survived a plane crash decades before and swore never to fly again. But his grandchildren lived across the ocean, and he had finally overcome his fear to visit them. That flight almost confirmed his worst nightmares, but the outcome, he said, finally healed a decades-old wound. He went back to flying regularly after that. There were also letters from children, dozens of them. Drawings of planes with smoking engines, but always with happy endings. The plane landing safely, passengers getting off and waving. A 7-year-old wrote me, "Thank you for saving us, Mr. Pilot. When I grow up, I want to be like you." I kept all those letters. They remind me of something fundamental about what we do as pilots. We don't fly machines. We fly hopes, dreams, family reunions, business opportunities, first trips, last goodbyes. Every seat in the cabin represents a story, a life, human connections that depend on us to materialize across impossible distances. The experience also fundamentally changed how I view my work. Before that day I had, I won't lie, a certain degree of complacency. 15,000 flight hours, 23 years of experience, countless perfect takeoffs and landings. You start to feel you've mastered something, that you're in absolute control. Those 8 minutes completely destroyed that illusion, and ironically made me a better pilot. I learned to respect every flight as if it were the first. I learned that statistically improbable still means possible. I learned that complacency is the silent enemy that hides in the cockpits of experienced pilots, whispering that you've seen it all, that nothing can surprise you. The truth is that the sky always has one more lesson to teach. Now, when I do the pre-flight briefing, it's not just a ritual. When I review emergency procedures, it's not just protocol. When I check every system before takeoff, it's not just habit. It's conscious preparation for the day when the impossible decides to become real again. And I teach this to younger pilots whenever I have the opportunity. Never underestimate the sky, I tell them. It doesn't care about your flight hours or your experience. It's not impressed by your certificates or your medals. The only thing the sky respects is preparation, knowledge, and the humility to recognize that you're never completely in control. Andrew and I still fly together occasionally. We developed a connection that goes beyond simple professional camaraderie. It's the kind of bond that forms when you face something extraordinary together with someone and come out the other side. We don't talk much about that day, but we don't need to. There's a tacit understanding between us, an absolute trust that was forged in those critical minutes over the Atlantic. The airline implemented significant changes after the incident. Volcanic ash detection systems were improved. Routes were adjusted to include greater safety margins in relation to areas of potential volcanic activity. Communication protocols between geological monitoring agencies and aviation authorities were strengthened. Our incident, as terrifying as it was, contributed to making aviation safer for everyone. And that, in the end, is what matters. We don't fly just to transport people from A to B. We fly to learn, to improve, to make each subsequent flight a little safer than the previous one. Every incident, every near miss, every moment of tension is an opportunity for the entire industry to evolve. Some nights I still wake from dreams where I'm back in that cockpit, watching all 4 engines fail in sequence, feeling that terrifying silence envelope the aircraft. But in those dreams now, instead of panic, I feel something different, a determined calm, a clarity of purpose. Because I know how the story ends, I know we made the right decisions. I know that 492 people got home to their families. When people ask me if I'm afraid to fly after that experience, I laugh and answer honestly, I have more respect, not fear. Fear is what you feel when you don't understand something, when you're helpless before it. Respect is what you feel when you fully understand the risks, meticulously prepared for them, and choose to face them anyway because it's worth it. Flying is worth it. Seeing the sunrise at 39,000 feet is worth it. Connecting people across oceans and continents is worth it. Being the person 492 individuals trust with their lives is worth every second of training, every hour of study, every moment of doubt and fear. My daughter, who was 10 when the incident happened, asked me a few weeks later, "Dad, were you scared?" I thought carefully before responding. "Yes," I told her. "I was scared. But you know what's interesting about fear? It doesn't paralyze you when you've trained adequately. Instead, it sharpens your senses, speeds up your thinking, makes you access reserves of skill and knowledge you didn't even know you had. Fear isn't your enemy. It's your ally if you learn to work with it." She looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "So you're a hero?" "No," I responded immediately. "I'm not a hero. I'm a professional who did the job I was trained for. The real hero is the engineering that created an aircraft capable of gliding for 8 minutes. It's the engines that managed to restart even after being choked by volcanic ash. It's Andrew, who worked with me in perfect sync. It's the cabin crew that kept 492 people calm. It's an entire industry of thousands of people, engineers, mechanics, instructors, regulators, who created the systems and training that allowed us to face the impossible. Because that's the truth few understand about modern aviation. Every safe flight is the result of decades of accumulated knowledge, millions of hours of collective work, countless people you'll never meet, but who contributed to your safety. When you board an airplane, you're not just trusting the pilot, you're trusting an entire civilization of technical and human expertise. If you're afraid of flying, I understand completely. But let me offer you a perspective. Those 8 minutes over the Atlantic represent a chain of events so statistically improbable that you have a better chance of being struck by lightning 3 times in the same week. And even in that extraordinarily rare situation, the systems worked. The training worked, the people worked. You know what keeps me flying, even after experiencing what could have been a catastrophe? It's the absolute marvel of human collaboration. It's the fact that we can create machines that defy gravity. It's the knowledge that when something goes wrong, we have layers and layers of redundancies, procedures, protocols. A century of learning distilled into systems that save lives. And it's the indescribable privilege of being part of that. So when you board your next flight and see the pilots in the cockpit, know that they carry not just the responsibility for your safety, but the weight of all aviation knowledge. Know that each of them trained for scenarios they hope never to face. Know that they dedicated their lives to mastering a profession where error is not an option. And if you're feeling anxious, remember, those pilots want to get home as much as you do. They have families waiting for them, lives outside the cockpit, dreams and plans. Your safety isn't just a job for them, it's personal. The last thing I'll say about that day, when I finally left the cockpit after all the passengers had disembarked, after all the post-landing procedures, after all the checks and reports, I stood alone in the cockpit for a moment. I placed my hands on the controls one last time, felt the cold leather under my fingers, looked at the now silent instruments, and I said quietly, "Thank you. Thank you to the aircraft that gave me 8 minutes. Thank you to the engineers who designed it. Thank you to my instructors who prepared me. Thank you to Andrew. Thank you to fate, to luck, to providence, call it what you will, that allowed those engines to restart. Aviation taught me that gratitude isn't weakness. It's recognition that no matter how skilled you are, there are always elements beyond your control, and when those elements align in your favor, you give thanks. Today, I continue flying. Every takeoff still moves me. Every landing still fills me with satisfaction. And every flight in between is an opportunity to apply everything I've learned, including the lessons from those 8 extraordinary minutes when I had 492 lives in my hands and the ocean waiting below. The sky isn't our enemy. It's not our domain. It's our teacher, stern but fair, demanding but rewarding. But, and for those of us who choose to spend our lives in its classroom, every day is a lesson, every flight a test, every safe landing a graduation. 8 minutes. Seems like such a short time, doesn't it? But in those 480 seconds, I learned more about myself, about leadership, about decision-making under extreme pressure, about humility and competence, than in years of normal flying. If I could go back in time and avoid that day, would I? Honestly, I don't know. The experience was terrifying, but it was also profoundly transformative. It made me a better pilot, a better person. It taught me that our true nature emerges not on sunny days of smooth flying, but in storms, in crises, in moments when the impossible looks you in the eye and asks, "What are you going to do now?" And what do? You take a deep breath. You access your training, you work the problem, you make decisions, you don't give up, never ever give up. Because behind you are 492 people who believe in you, who trusted their lives to you, who deserve to get home that night. And that, in the end, is the entire philosophy of aviation distilled into a single truth. No matter what happens, you bring people home. Always. Somehow you find a way. You bring people home. This story is based on real events. All names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Special thanks to the aviation professionals who share their experiences to make the skies safer. How would you react if all the plane's engines failed at 39,000 feet? Would you trust the pilot to make the right decisions in just 8 minutes? These are the questions no passenger wants to ask, but every pilot needs to be ready to answer. Not with words, but with actions. And that day, over the Atlantic, we found our answers. If this story made you reflect on the complexity and silent heroism of aviation, subscribe to the Black Box channel. We share real stories of pilots who faced the impossible and lived to tell about it. Because every story is a lesson, and every lesson makes the skies safer for all of us.